please. The honourable member for Argyll.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I stand this afternoon or this morning on a point of order. It's with regret that I rise on this point of order on a serious matter arising from yesterday's question period. Yesterday, the House witnessed a minister provide various pieces of information about a client in the care of her department. Given such personal information is not only a breach of the law, but also clearly unacceptable in this House. In reviewing the precedents, it's clear to me that there is a well-established practice so universal that it's an enforceable convention of this House. I will ask you to find that the Minister of Community Services comments were not in order, and then it'll be up to the Minister and the Premier to do the right thing. The situation I'm referring to happened when the Minister was being questioned by the member for Bedford Birch Cove. The member pointed out to personal information about a particular person's case that may have been better suited for a private meeting and not in the public domain. But it is the Minister of Community Services responses that are so galling. I will table the transcript and highlighted portions of the Minister's answers that I believe are in question, and I think I have them right here. The Minister was responsible for many very vulnerable people's personal information, so how can she be trusted after such a serious breach? When I was Minister of that department, it was clear that it was completely inappropriate to give personal information in the House. All ministers learn that that is a hard line, which they cannot cross. It is the custom of almost every minister of every department which possesses personal information. According to Bushane's at section 317, points of order are questions raised with the view of calling attention to any departure from the standing orders or the customary modes of proceeding in debate or in the conduct of legislative business. It may be raised at virtually any time by any member. Clearly, Mr. Speaker, the custom of this House is no minister should ever mention personal information about a client of his or her department. It is a driven part by the law and part by the deep sense of respect of what is fair to mention in debate in public. These customs are defensible as written rules and equally as important to good order and honourable conduct. Several ministers in Canada have been forced to resign for revealing personal information, and I cite the following precedents as examples, but there are others, including Nova Scotia, going back many years. April 1991, Ontario's Health Minister resigned for breaching the privacy of a man's medical records. October 2005, New Brunswick's Family and Community Services Minister resigned after he released the name of a ward of the province to the media. February 2010, New Brunswick's Minister of Justice resigned amid allegations he broke the law and violated the privacy rights of a New Brunswick woman. In March 2012, British Columbia's Minister of State for Multiculturalism resigned when he appropriately shared government correspondence with a private company. So, Mr. Speaker, I, at the very least, would respectfully ask that you find the minister breached a custom of this House, and I would ask that you review this and come back with an answer at your earliest convenience.
The Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the member brings up an issue here that in the questioning there was information that was led by the questioner and then the respondent, Mr. Speaker. That was so the information was public before that, and it was in the public domain before the minister had responded. So with those few comments, Mr. Speaker, I would like for you, when you make your decision, to have that in mind, that this was public knowledge before the minister responded. Thank you.
The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In bringing up the question yesterday, I did have permission from the mother and from the client in question, number one. And number two, the information that the minister did offer up was not in the public domain before question period that day, and was not in my question as well. Thank you.
I will take the point of order under advisement, and I will report back to the House at my earliest opportunity. Orders of the day. Before we do daily routine, the topic for late debate has been chosen and it's been submitted. Therefore, be it resolved that the Premier, while in opposition, called user fee hikes across the board tax increases but turned around and hiked 1,400 user fees, and Nova Scotians are fully expecting the Minister of Finance to hike user fees late this afternoon, further squeezing Nova Scotians and making life even less affordable under the NDP. Submitted by the Honourable Member for Bedford Birch Cove. Daily routine, presenting and reading petitions. Presenting reports of committees. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to table a notice of fee increases pursuant to the Fees Act.
The report is tabled. Statements by ministers. Government notices of motion. Introduction of bills. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 5 of the Acts of 2011, the Elections Act.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 5 of the Acts of 2011, the Elections Act.
Bill number 5, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 5 of the Acts of 2011, the Elections Act.
Order that the bill be read a second time on a future day. The Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2010, the Finance Act, respecting intergenerational reporting.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2010, the Finance Act, respecting intergenerational reporting.
Bill number 6, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2010, the Finance Act, respecting intergenerational reporting.
Order that the bill be read a second time on a future day. The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 260 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Liquor Control Act, respecting injunctions.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 260 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Liquor Control Act, respecting injunctions.
Bill number 7, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 260 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Liquor Control Act, respecting injunctions.
Order that the bill be read a second time on a future day. The Honourable Member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 217 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Income Tax Act, to provide a food bank donation tax credit for farmers.
The Honourable Member for Kings West begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 217 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Income Tax Act, to provide a food bank donation tax credit for farmers.
Bill number 8, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 217 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Income Tax Act, to provide a food bank donation tax credit for farmers.
Order that the bill be read a second time on a future day. Notices, jumped the gun. The Honourable Member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Review the Funding and Delivery of Public Education in Nova Scotia.
last bill. The honourable member for Colchester North begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Respect the Funding and Delivery of Public Education in Nova Scotia.
Bill number 9, entitled An Act to Review the Funding and Delivery of Public Education in Nova Scotia.
Order that the bill be read a second time on a future day. The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Promote the Development of District and Neighbourhood Geothermal Heating and Cooling Systems.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Promote the Development of District and Neighbourhood Geothermal Heating and Cooling Systems.
Bill number 10, entitled An Act to Promote the Development of District and Neighbourhood Geothermal Heating and Cooling Systems.
Order that the bill be read a second time on a future day. The honourable member for Yarmouth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Review Ancillary Fees at Universities in Nova Scotia.
The honourable member for Yarmouth begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Review Auxiliary Fees of Universities in Nova Scotia. Auxiliary.
Bill number 11, entitled An Act to Review Ancillary Fees at Universities in Nova Scotia.
Order the bill be read a second time on a future day. The honourable leader of the official opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 376 of the Revised Statutes, the 1989, the Public Service Act, to establish the Office of Fire and Emergency Services.
The honourable leader of the official opposition begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 376 of the Revised Statute 1989, the Public Service Act, to establish the Office of Fire and Emergency Services.
Bill number 12, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 376 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Public Service Act, to establish the Office of Fire and Emergency Services.
Order that the bill be read a second time on a future day. I will now recognize the honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 260 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Liquor Control Act, to permit the operation of businesses that assist others in the making of beer, wine, or cider.
Hey. The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 260 of the Revised Statute 1989, the Liquor Control Act, to permit the operation of businesses that assist others in the making of beer, wine, or cider.
Bill number 13, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 260 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Liquor Control Act, to permit the operation of businesses that assist others in the making of beer, wine, or cider.
Order that the bill be read a second time on a future day. The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Support Diabetic Persons in Nova Scotia.
The honourable member for Kings West begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Support Diabetic Persons in Nova Scotia.
Bill number 14, entitled An Act to Support Diabetic Persons in Nova Scotia.
Order that the bill be read a second time on a future day. The honourable member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 1 of the Acts of 1995-96, the Education Act, to ensure appropriate class sizes for grades primary to 3.
The honourable member for Colchester North begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 1 of the Acts of 1995-96, the Education Act, to ensure appropriate class sizes for grades primary to 3.
Bill number 15, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 1 of the Acts of 1995-96, the Education Act, to ensure appropriate class sizes for grades primary to 3.
Order that the bill be read a second time on a future day. The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act Respecting the Review of the Green Energy Equipment Tax Credit in Manitoba for implementation in Nova Scotia.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act Respecting the Review of the Green Energy Equipment Tax Credit in Manitoba for implementation in Nova Scotia.
Bill number 16, entitled An Act Respecting the Review of the Green Energy Equipment Tax Credit in Manitoba for implementation in Nova Scotia.
Order that the bill be read a second time on a future day. The honourable leader of the official opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Review the Public School Programs in Nova Scotia.
The honourable leader of the official opposition begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Review the Public School Programs in Nova Scotia.
Bill number 17, entitled An Act to Review the Public School Programs in Nova Scotia.
Order that the bill be read a second time on a future day. I will now recognize the honourable member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Support Students with Diabetes and Other Life-Threatening Illnesses.
Thank you. The honourable member for Colchester North begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Support Students with Diabetes and Other Life-Threatening Illnesses.
Bill number 18, entitled An Act to Support Students with Diabetes and Other Life-Threatening Illnesses.
Order that the bill be read a second time on a future day. The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Provide for the Establishment of an Entrepreneur Stream under the Nova Scotia Nominee Program.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Provide for the Establishment of an Entrepreneur Stream under the Nova Scotia Nominee Program.
Bill number 19, entitled An Act to Provide for the Establishment of an Entrepreneur Stream under the Nova Scotia Nominee Program.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Do you want to? I think you have to order that be read a second time.
Order that the bill be read a second time on a future day. The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 25 of the Acts of 2004, the Electricity Act, respecting renewable energy providers.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 5 of the Acts of 2004, the Electricity Act, respecting renewable energy providers.
Bill number 20, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 25 of the Acts of 2004, the Electricity Act, respecting renewable energy providers.
Order that the bill be read a second time on a future day. The honourable leader of the official opposition.
Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Ensure Appropriate Supports in the Classroom for Children with Special Needs.
The honourable leader of the official opposition begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Ensure Appropriate Supports in Classrooms for Children with Special Needs.
Bill number 21, entitled An Act to Ensure Appropriate Supports in the Classroom for Children with Special Needs.
Order that the bill be read a second time on a future day. The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure to introduce an act entitled An Act to Establish Joseph Howe Day.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Establish Joseph Howe Day.
Bill number 22, entitled An Act to Establish Joseph Howe Day.
Order that the bill be read a second time on a future day. The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the member for Digby Annapolis, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 217 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Income Tax Act, to provide a Nova Scotia sound recording tax credit.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East, for the honourable member for Digby Annapolis, begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 217 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Income Tax Act, to provide a Nova Scotia sound recording tax credit.
Bill number 23, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 217 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Income Tax Act, to provide a Nova Scotia sound recording tax credit.
Order that the bill be read a second time on a future day. The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Develop a Multi-Year Funding Framework.
The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Develop a Multi-Year Funding Framework.
Bill number 24, entitled An Act to Develop a Multi-Year Funding Framework.
Order that the bill be read a second time on a future day. The honourable leader of the official opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 195 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Health Act.
The honourable leader of the official opposition begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 195 of the Revised Statute 1989, the Health Act.
Bill number 25, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 195 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Health Act.
Order that the bill be read a second time on a future day. The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the member for Digby Annapolis, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 31 of the Acts of 1996, the Sales Tax Act.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East, on behalf of the honourable member for Digby Annapolis, begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 31 of the Acts of 1996, the Sales Tax Act.
Bill number 26, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 31 of the Acts of 1996, the Sales Tax Act.
Order that the bill be read a second time on a future day. The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 120 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Daycare Act.
The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 120 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Daycare Act.
Bill number 27, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 120 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Day Care Act.
Order that the bill be read a second time on a future day. The honourable leader of the official opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled The Act to Review the Provincial Tax Regime.
The honourable leader of the official opposition begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Review the Provincial Tax Regime.
Bill number 28, entitled An Act to Review the Provincial Tax Regime.
Order that the bill be read a second time on a future day. The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 213 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Housing Development Corporation Act, to establish a Housing Development Corporation Board.
The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 213 of the Revised Statute 1989, the Housing Development Corporation Act, to establish a Housing Development Corporation Board.
Bill number 29, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 213 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Housing Development Corporation Act, to establish a Housing Development Corporation Board.
Order that the bill be read a second time on a future day. I will now introduce the honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Thank you yet again, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 213 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Housing Development Corporation Act, respecting CMHC funding.
The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 213 of the Revised Statute 1989, the Housing Development Corporation Act, respecting CMHC funding.
Bill number 30, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 213 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Housing Development Corporation Act, respecting CMHC funding.
Order that the bill be read a second time on a future day. Notices of motion. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day. I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on January 26, 2013, Annapolis, Royal Nova Scotia and Canada lost an exceptional individual in the sudden passing of Doreen Lewis. And whereas Doreen will be forever remembered for her leadership in municipal politics, her tireless work and advancement at Mount St. Vincent University Centre for Women in Business, and the leadership she exhibited as principal of 2 Nova Scotia community colleges in Halifax. And whereas Doreen's community at large became a much better place as a result of her volunteer activities with organizations such as the Vanier Institute of the Families, the Maritime Conservatory of the Performing Arts, and International Women's Foundation, and the ISIS, to name but a few. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the Legislative Assembly extend our sympathies to Doreen's family and many friends, and reflect upon and remember through a moment of silence the immense contribution Doreen Lewis made to our province and country. Mr. Speaker, I'll ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, if I may, I would like to request a moment of silence after the reading of this resolution. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas ECMA award-winning songwriter and Juno-nominated guitar player Jay Smith of Whitney Pier passed away yesterday on March 27, 2013. And whereas Jay had an unmatched, spirited drive in his guitar playing that made him the choice of recording artists Matt Mays and Gordie Sampson. And whereas musicians feel emotion on a deeper level and their music is a gift that brings happiness into our lives. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly extend our condolences to Jay's family, and may our prayers and thoughts be with him this Easter weekend. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. Thank you. The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the indulgence of the House, I'm asking, can we revert to the order to go to government notices of motion?
All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall read and table the message from His Honour the Lieutenant Governor transmitting the estimates of sums required for the service of the province for the fiscal year ending March the 31st, 2014 for the consideration of this House. Table the estimates books, table the Crown Corporation's business plans, table the estimates and Crown Corporation business plans resolutions, deliver my budget speech, and move that the estimates of sums required for the service of the province for the fiscal year ending March the 31st, 2014, being supply to be granted to Her Majesty, and the Crown Corporation business plans be referred to the Committee of the Whole House on Supply. Mr. Speaker, for the information of the House, the budget will be presented on April the 4th.
The motion is tabled. We will now go back, are we going back in the order paper to notices of motion now? And I will now recognize the Honourable Member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption following resolution. Whereas Straight Area Transit is a unique community-based public transportation model serving the Straight area of Nova Scotia, and whereas Straight Area Transit has provided much-needed transportation for the residents of Richmond, Inverness, and Port Hawkesbury to attend medical appointments, school, and other activities. And whereas at 4 p.m. on Monday, March 25th, Straight Area Transit suspended its operations due to financial difficulties, creating tremendous stress for its many users and employees. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of the House of Assembly work together with provincial, municipal, and federal representatives to find a long-term solution to ensure the viability of Straight Area Transit. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice, and on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas burn survivor Michael Galtois is bringing his motivational message to local junior high students this spring as part of a proactive effort to reduce grass fires. And whereas Michael was just 15 when he suffered burns to 90% of his body, and he hopes that his message about positive choices might save local youth from suffering the same fate. And whereas Michael also addresses first responders and emergency services personnel with the same message. Therefore be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly acknowledge CBRM Fire Services, the Cape Breton Victoria Regional School Board, the Department of Natural Resources, and the Cape Breton Regional Police Services for taking this proactive approach to a reoccurring spring threat, and thank Michael Galtois for sharing his personal story. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Premier hiked 1,400 user fees late one afternoon outside of the legislature in an attempt to avoid notice by Nova Scotians, and whereas the NDP hiked the HST after specifically promising not to, shifted 2 university payments into 1 year, and have consistently made spending projections and employee estimates higher than actuals, and whereas the NDP tore up the MOU with municipalities with no notice and failed to disclose a $27 million overstatement in revenues, therefore be it resolved that the NDP track record of university prepayments, consistent technique of making spending projections and employee estimates higher than actuals, and failure to disclose a $27 million revenue overstatement highlights their inability to manage the finances of the province and brings into question the veracity of their budgetary reporting. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? I hear several noes. The motion is tabled. The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Mayflower Curling Club team of Matthew Manuel, Ryan Abraham, Nick Zacharnuk, and Alec Cameron are the 2013 Nova Scotia Under-18 Provincial Champions. And whereas this weekend, the team will be traveling to Stephenville, Newfoundland to compete in the Under-18 Atlantic Curling Competition at the Caribou Curling Club. And whereas this is the first time the young team will represent their province in regional competition. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House wish the Mayflower Curling Club team all the best as they head to Newfoundland today to proudly represent Nova Scotia in the Under-18 Championship. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, hereby give notice a future day. Whereas the fate of our province and country lies in the hands of our youngest citizens, and whereas 14-year-old Cassidy Megan from Halifax, the original founder of Purple Day, was in Ottawa on Tuesday of this week to celebrate legislation tabled last June by the Honourable Member for Halifax West, which recognizes March 26 as Purple Day for epilepsy across our great country. And whereas Cassidy Megan founded Purple Day when she was just 9 years old, and today March 26 was set aside nationally and internationally in 70 countries worldwide to deepen our knowledge of epilepsy, dispel the myths, and improve the lives of those who are living with the disorder. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the Legislative Assembly be ever mindful of the social isolation and work barriers experienced by Nova Scotians living with epilepsy, and acknowledge that our province and country are in great hands under the leadership of Cassidy Megan. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on Saturday, February 23, 2013, the first annual Steve McDermott Memorial Scholarship Hockey Tournament took place in Bedak. And whereas the tragic passing of Steve McDermott last fall not only left a void with his grieving family, but also in the sports community, where he contributed much of his life to volunteering and establishing school teams in Bedak and Iona. And whereas his devotion to his wife Grace, his children Ben, Caleb, and Jessica, and the love of sports resulted in $5,400 being raised as the community honored his memory by developing this scholarship. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly recognize the contribution and legacy the late Steve McDermott has left to his community, and congratulate all volunteers and participants on their success with the first annual Steve McDermott Memorial Scholarship Hockey Tournament. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas firefighters may be called upon to risk their lives to successfully do their jobs, yet they are often humble and modest about their acts of bravery. And whereas in 1981, 19-year-old firefighter Ed McLean entered a burning house in Lake Ainslie, Cape Breton 3 times before successfully rescuing 3-year-old Melanie Campbell, who had been hiding under her parents' bed. And whereas earlier this year at a special celebration at the Lake Ainslie Fire Department, Ed had an opportunity to meet Melanie again, 31 years after he carried her from the burning building. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House congratulate Ed McLean for his heroic efforts in saving Melanie Campbell's life, for his special recognition by the Lake Ainslie Fire Department, and for receiving the Heroes Award from the Valley Kemptown Fire Brigade in Colchester North, where he is currently an active member. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Argyll.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future date. I shall move the adoption of the following resolution, whereas after 4 years, Boyd Bond is stepping down as president of the Eastern Passage Minor Basketball at the end of April, and whereas Boyd has been a mainstay of the basketball community, having coached the Eastern Passage girls team for 8 years and the EPEC junior high girls team for the past 3 years. And whereas Boyd devoted a large portion of his life to the sport in Eastern Passage, organizing work shifts and vacation time to ensure he was available for practices and games. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly salute Boyd Bond for his dedication and commitment to the Eastern Passage sporting community and thank him for his service as he steps down as president of Eastern Passage Minor Basketball. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the students of Basin View Drive Community School in Bedford have teamed up with local musicians to record a CD to raise funds to build a new playground for the younger students at the school. And whereas Tom Swift, Jeremy Fisher, and Megan Smith are among 8 professional artists who recorded tracks on the CD called Basin View Rocks. And whereas the making of the CD exposes the children to the joy of music while providing them a new and safer place to play, therefore be it resolved that the members of this House of Assembly congratulate everyone involved in this innovative funding project and wish the students good luck in selling their CD. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on May 3rd, 2010, Petty Officer 2nd Class Craig Blake, a member of the Navy Fleet Diving Unit, was tragically killed by an improvised explosive device while in service of his country in the Panjwai district of Afghanistan. And whereas Petty Officer Blake was a natural athlete and loved to play sports, especially with his 2 sons, Kane and Ty, in the Montebello Park near their Dartmouth home. And whereas community members, Councillor Darren Fisher and members of Petty Officer Blake's family, Mrs. Priscilla Blake and Kane and Ty Blake, have begun the process through the Halifax Regional Municipality to rename Montebello Park to Craig Blake Park in his honour. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly support the renaming of the Montebello Park in Dartmouth East to Craig Blake Park in honour of Officer Blake's commitment and sacrifice. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Yarmouth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas for many years, Reverend A.D. Bill Newell has been actively and generously giving back to his community, including his involvement in the Rotary Club, the Yarmouth Food Bank, the Yarmouth Fuel Bank, the Yarmouth Fire Department, Big Brothers Big Sisters, and chairing the organizing committee of the 2013 Special Olympics Nova Scotia Provincial Winter Games, which were held in Yarmouth in February 2013. And whereas on February 15th, the 39th Annual Provincial Volunteer Awards ceremonies will take place in Halifax, and whereas the town of Yarmouth has selected Reverend Newell as its volunteer representative for 2013, therefore be it resolved that the members of this House of Assembly congratulate Reverend Bill Newell on being named the 2013 volunteer representative for the town of Yarmouth and thank him for his many years of selfless and unwavering devotion to his community, which has had an incredible and tangible impact on the lives of many. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on May 25th, 2013, members of the Soldiers Memorial Hospital Auxiliary will commemorate 60 years of enhancing health care in the eastern end of Annapolis County. And whereas the Soldiers Memorial Hospital Health Auxiliary is comprised of volunteers who contribute countless hours to fundraising to assist in purchasing equipment which enhances health care delivery to patients in their community. And whereas through their efforts of this organization, Soldiers Memorial Hospital is a better equipped facility. Therefore, be it resolved that the House of Assembly thank members of the Soldiers Memorial Hospital Auxiliary for 60 years of providing support to the community and hospital and congratulate them on a job well done. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of following resolution. Whereas the Straight Pirates playoff run continues with their 4-1 series win over the Glace Bay Miners in the final of the Sid Row division of the Nova Scotia Junior B Hockey League on Tuesday, March 26th. Whereas the Straight Pirates have advanced to the finals and await either the Brookfield Elks or the Sackville Blazers, who are playing in the Fred Fox Division Final. And whereas under the leadership of head coach Tim McMillan, the Straight Pirates have played solid and disciplined hockey. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the House of Assembly congratulate the Straight Pirates on winning the Sid Row Division Final and wish them well in the upcoming finals of the Nova Scotia Junior B Hockey League. And Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
A request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Yarmouth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Virginia Stoddard has been a dedicated and tireless volunteer in her community for many years, giving her time and energy to the Hear Hear Music Society of Yarmouth, the Yarmouth Art Society, the Yarmouth Public Library and Museum, Yarmouth County Museum, and the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia's Western Branch. And whereas on April 15th, the 39th Annual Provincial Volunteer Awards ceremony will take place in Halifax, and whereas the municipality of Yarmouth has selected Virginia Stoddard as its volunteer representative for 2013, therefore be it resolved that the members of this House of Assembly congratulate Virginia Stoddard on being named the 2013 volunteer representative for the municipality of Yarmouth and thank her for her enduring dedication to those in her community. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Argyll.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on March 3rd, the Barrington Arena Lions Club won the annual Nova Scotia Lions Curling Club Championship, which was held in Meteghan. And whereas the Barrington Lions have been competing in the annual Bonspiel for about 30 years, and although they've been runner-ups and in semifinals, they've never won. And whereas team second, Robert Hopkins, Skip Murray Atkinson, and third, Billy Simons, lead Mervyn Perry, and spare Paul Nickerson won the Finney Trophy by a score of 7-6 over the Yarmouth Lions. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate the Barrington Area Lions Club, Robert Hopkins, Murray Atkinson, Billy Simons, Mervyn Perry, and Paul Nickerson on winning this trophy and wish them success in years to come. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Mel Bootlier was born on January 29, 1928 in Seabright, Nova Scotia, and vowed at an early age to always help others in need. And whereas for over a quarter century, Mel has run the Parker Street Food and Furniture Bank, taking no salary for his work, providing food and other necessities to those affected by poverty. And whereas Mel has been the recipient of the Order of Nova Scotia, Canadian Volunteer of of the Year and the Order of Canada. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly recognize the credo, volunteers aren't paid not because they are worthless, but because they are priceless, and congratulate the priceless Mel Boutlier on his 85th birthday, wishing him many more years of happiness and service to the community. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Victoria County resident Calvin Hillier recently received a life membership award from the Royal Canadian Legion Branch 53 in Bedak. And whereas Calvin has been recognized many times over the years for his volunteer work and dedication in both the Sea Cadet movement and the Navy League of Canada. And whereas Calvin was also honoured with the Navy League Long Service Medal and Appreciation Awards from Sea Cadet Corps in New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, Ontario, and British Columbia. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Calvin Hillier on his awards and thank him for his ongoing and outstanding contribution to his community. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Craft Canada runs a contest called Craft Hockey Goes On, which awards $1 million to local minor hockey associations across Canada. And whereas Richard Halverson, manager of the North Shore Rec Centre located in Tatamagouche, Colchester North, was nominated as one of the top 100 nominees from across Canada. And whereas each grand prize winning nominee will win $100,000 for their selected minor hockey associations, and 22nd prize winning nominees will receive $20,000 for their selected minor hockey association. Therefore, be it resolved, all members of the House of Assembly congratulate Richard Halverson, the only nominee from Colchester County, for the Hockey Goes On contest sponsored by Kraft. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Connor Shepard from Lewisburg graduated on February the 15th as a primary care paramedics from Medavie Health Ed School of Paramedics Medicine, and whereas Connor Shepard is the son of Glenn and Eleanor Shepard, and whereas Connor is also one of Lewisburg's volunteer medical first responders. Therefore, be resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Connor Shepard on this great accomplishment and wish him all the very best in his future. And Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution.
Chris?
Whereas Ashley Hannah, a grade 4 student at Mountain View Elementary School from Howie Centre, has made her schoolmates and everyone in her life become aware of epilepsy, a disease that affects over 300,000 Canadians. And whereas Ashley Hannah was diagnosed with epilepsy when she was just 5 years old, and whereas Ashley is on a mission to educate everyone in her school about epilepsy, and on the March 26th, which is National Purple Day for Epilepsies in Canada, and everybody at her school wore purple on that day. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate and thank Ashley Hannah, her principal Jeannie Stone, and all the staff and all the students from Mountain View Elementary for making everyone aware of this Purple Day. And Mr. Speaker, I request a waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. Orders of the day, oral questions put by members to ministers. The time is now 12:02. We will finish at 1:02. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the past 3 years, the Premier has lost credibility when it comes to financial management, Mr. Speaker. We know that his budget last year overstated revenue by $27 million. This was more than an error, Mr. Speaker. It was a conscious effort to make the numbers match the storyline instead, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to the management of the province's finances, the Premier has shown time and time again, Mr. Speaker, fiction after fiction. So why should Nova Scotians accept anything different next week?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, what this government has demonstrated is some of the best financial management practices that the government of Nova Scotia has ever seen. In fact, Mr. Speaker, we have changed past practices to reflect greater transparency. We have done more in the way of multi-year budgeting. We have set targets and met them. We have ensured that the expenditures made by our departments consistently come in under budget, Mr. Speaker. That is the record of this government. It is a good one, and we are proud of it.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, he forgot to add that he added $1.4 billion to the debt of the province of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this comes down to an issue of trust, Mr. Speaker. This is a Premier who hiked 1,400 user fees late on a Friday afternoon, Mr. Speaker, and today he hiked those fees once again, even with a greater number, Mr. Speaker. He hiked the HST after specifically saying he wouldn't, shifted 2 university payments in 1 year, tore up the MOU with municipalities without notice, and failed to disclose a $27 million overstated in revenues in last year's budget, Mr. Speaker. If Nova Scotians could not believe last year's numbers, why should they believe next week's anymore?
The Honourable the Premier.
Oh, Mr. Speaker, I understand that when it comes to the performance of the province and when it comes to the fact that we have a group of very hard-working people here who are trying to make sure that we balance the challenges that governments face along with the opportunities that are out there, that is not something that the Leader of the Opposition and the party that he represents want to encourage. But the reality is this is this is the job that we have. We are supplying the services of that the people of this province require, because this government is about the people. This is about ensuring that they get what they need in order to be able to live lives of dignity, in order to be able to make sure that young people are able to get a job when they need one, to make sure that the children who go to our schools get the education that they need. That is the job of the government of Nova Scotia. We're doing it, and we're doing it within the financial ability that the province has.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the job of a government, and indeed any Nova Scotian, is to be open and honest and truthful, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when you know and when you knew there was a mistake in last year's budget, and yet you stood in this House and allowed that myth to continue for a year, and only pointed out by the Auditor General, Mr. Speaker, it speaks to the arrogance and credibility of this government, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there isn't a single employer in the province of Nova Scotia who wouldn't fire an employee who misled them, Mr. Speaker. So my question for the Premier, did he fire the former finance minister, or did the former finance minister quit after tabling a budget he knew had a $27 million error?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, try as they might like, simple fact of the matter is that the Leader of the Opposition misstates this completely. The former Minister of Finance followed the procedure that, in fact, Liberal governments would have followed in the past, which is they choose a date on which economic data is fixed, and it goes into the budget the way it should. The Auditor General was advised of the incoming economic data. He was advised that it would be added in the first financial forecast. He accepted that. In fact, Mr. Speaker, he did a letter which was included with the budget debate that specifically said that he agreed with the forecast, the revenue forecasts for the province. That, of course, is the way that it should be done. He also put forward in his last report a number of recommendations with respect to transparency. And as I've already pointed out, this is a government that is leading the way in Canada in transparency. And we're going to adopt those recommendations and make the financial reporting of our province even stronger.
The honourable member for Argyll.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Community Services. Yesterday, the minister in question period revealed very personal information about an apparent client of her department, and I tabled that information earlier. I've already cited a number of precedents and how it's virtually automatic that a minister resign under those circumstances. So my question to the minister is, will she resign immediately and apologize to the persons that she hurt with her breach of confidentiality?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, my answer is no.
The Honourable Member for Argyll on his first supplementary.
I guess there's not even an apology coming here. Mr. Speaker, it's not surprising that the minister fails to understand the consequences of her action or how serious they are. The minister is responsible for hundreds of case files for very vulnerable people who must be able to trust her to keep their personal information confidential. But last year when we called for her resignation over her handling of the Talbot file and her department's public and personal dismissal of the respected executive director, of course she refused at that time, but shortly after the Premier took away her responsibility for that file and addiction services. When the minister was caught in multiple flip-flops about the fate of private daycares, and earlier this week in the speech from the throne, it appears the Premier took that responsibility away from her too. So I will ask the Premier, will he remove the minister from Cabinet for this shocking breach of confidentiality, and will he merely take away her responsibility for all her client files one by one until she has none left?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday in the House I reviewed the information that was provided by the minister, and I have to say I've often thought that the questions that get asked are, they're difficult ones for any minister. It's particularly difficult for ministers with portfolios like the Department of Community Services. I found the answer that the minister gave in relation to that file to be compassionate, to be understanding, to try to address what is a very serious issue, and she did so. I think that was entirely appropriate.
The Honourable Member for Argyll on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Clearly, this Premier excuses every incompetence with his government. With every breach, he stands by a budget cover-up of $27 million, which his Treasury Board deliberately overlooked, but the Auditor General did not. He kept his minister around with demoted responsibilities in spite of a string of issues that shows that she's not up to the job. And he himself thinks it's okay for a Premier not to know what is happening with his own government. But he is the Premier who ducks responsibility or leadership at every turn. Will the Premier finally do something and remove a minister who would divulge personal information in clear contravention of law, practice, and decency?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, nothing really could be further from the truth. What the minister said was perfectly appropriate. It is certainly within the rules and has no bearing on the release of information, all of which was already in the public domain. Mr. Speaker, it is simply the case that the minister takes each of her files very seriously, and I think, like all of us, would wish nothing but the best, particularly for those people who are vulnerable, who come out to us with issues, with problems, and the minister, I think, forthrightly says that when these kinds of issues come forward, that she is demonstrating great leadership in trying to deal with the issues head on. And in my view, Mr. Speaker, she should be congratulated for that work and not chastised as the member for Argyll would have us believe.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Energy. Mr. Speaker, the NDP have claimed again yesterday that the Muskrat Falls project is the cheapest solution for energy for Nova Scotians. Yet they have not proved that, and if they have the proof, they're hiding the information from Nova Scotians. Even Emera says, and I'll quote Emera's document, "A final decision on how customers will pay for this new source of electricity and over what period of time will actually be determined as part of the general rate application process before the UARB in 2017. Mr. Speaker, it's interesting that the minister seems to know what the rate will be because he's obviously telling everyone it will be the cheapest option, but even the proponent of the project says they don't know. So, Mr. Speaker, will the Minister of Energy tell us what the rate for Muskrat Falls Energy will be when it is landed in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and certainly the Maritime Link provides many opportunities for Nova Scotians to provide the lowest, fairest rates for electricity in this province. It provides stable prices for 35 years. I would suggest the honourable member might want to read the Dalton report that will give the assumptions and the details on why this is the best deal for ratepayers in this province.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East on his first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Dalton's report has been widely discredited by many of the experts in the field who have said that it actually misrepresented a lot of the numbers. He actually made claims about organizations that the organizations themselves said were inaccurate. So, you know, Mr. Speaker, this is exactly what the NDP did with the recent call for proposals on renewable energy. You know, they set up a process whereby they set up a process whereby Nova Scotia Power could undercut independent renewable energy suppliers and download the cost to ratepayers. And so you look at the South Canoe project as an example, it moves ahead with uncertain costs when in fact Dalton, who the minister in fact referenced, said that he told the department that there were risks associated with the way that would be done. So, Mr. Speaker, once again, the NDP chose higher profits for Nova Scotia Power and Emera so that they could spend that money outside of Nova Scotia over jobs and economic opportunities in green energy in Nova Scotia. So, Mr. Speaker, why did the minister allow the IPP process to be rigged so that Nova Scotia Power could download their capital cost to ratepayers while driving away new renewable energy investment that would have created new rural jobs in Nova Scotia and cheaper energy prices out in this province?
I can't, I'm having a little problem hearing today for a sec there. Did you say the word rigged? Yeah.
I can withdraw that.
I think that word is unparliamentary.
I'll withdraw that word.
Shame. And
I have to withdraw that word.
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and certainly you've referenced Mr. Dalton of Power Advisory Inc., a well-respected energy expert in the North American market. In fact, he's done work for this province since about the year 2000 under various governments. He's done work in New Brunswick and Vermont and various other jurisdictions in eastern North America. So, and he lives by his reputation. He has to defend his reports before public utilities like the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board, and he has to have credible evidence. All the evidence will be cross-referenced by other interveners to, and that's how he stays in business. He lives on his reputation. So I take umbrance with the honourable member's information on Mr. Dalton. But in reality, we have a plan for energy in this province. Certainly the Muskrat Falls is part of that. But, you know, we've taken the HST off of home energy. We've introduced Efficiency Nova Scotia to provide relief for low income and really for all Nova Scotians. And we have a plan to have the lowest, fairest electricity rates in this province.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East on his final supplementary.
You know, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Dalton was asked about this on February 27th, and he said, and I'll table this from the Herald, Mr. Dalton said Tuesday he does agree that allowing the utility to charge its capital costs back to ratepayers gives the project a different risk profile than the other projects had. So the minister is wrong. Mr. Dalton actually said that he advised the... you know, Mr. Speaker, at the same time, this minister can't tell us the price of this energy. His department was presented with a proposal which he decided to turn down. from a renewable energy in Cape Breton that offered a guaranteed rate for longer than 35 years at a cost cheaper than Muskrat Falls, that offered almost all of its economic opportunities in Nova Scotia instead of most of them in Newfoundland, offered a lower carbon footprint than Muskrat Falls, and delivered jobs in Cape Breton. This minister and this premier said no. I will table, Mr. Speaker, I will table the comparative cost analysis by Cape Breton Explorations for their project, which the minister already has, of course. So, Mr. Speaker, why did the minister refuse to allow a renewable energy project that offered to deliver fixed prices, good jobs in Nova Scotia, and new green investment in Nova Scotia, and instead choose to only support a project that costs ratepayers more than that one and helps make Nova Scotia Power even more money?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And you know, our goal here is to bring the lowest, fairest electricity rates for Nova Scotians, and I have to ask, you know, the honourable member, what's the cost of the Liberal plan? I haven't seen that yet either. So all I see is talk about Hydro-Quebec, and more Hydro-Quebec. So when are you going to start standing up for Nova Scotians?
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, let me read a comment from Hansard, October 5, 2009, about prepaying universities and fiscal shell games. Quote, "Well, I have a view of why they did that. They did that in order to make this year's books look as good as possible, knowing that they were on the eve of an election," unquote. And the members of the House might be wondering who said that, and I'm sure the minister is wondering, who said that? Well, Mr. Speaker, it was the current member for Fairview, Halifax Fairview, who was the finance minister at the time. He made these comments when he was while he was continuing the very same practices that he was disparaging, while he was doing a prepayment to universities. That is what the NDP government does, business, how they do business, saying one thing and doing another. Mr. Speaker, after proving that the NDP is more than willing to say one thing and do another, and after having shown that in past budgets the NDP has been comfortable with playing financial shell games, the question for the minister is, how can Nova Scotians be certain that this finance minister has not pulled yet another prepayment in order to make this year's books look as good as possible, knowing that they are also on the eve of an election?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, universities are a really important feature of Nova Scotia's economy and our learning environment. We're very lucky to have the strong university sector in our province, and if universities are in a situation where they require support from this government on an annual basis, we work very hard to accommodate what those needs are. And whether or not there's a prepayment in any year, I mean, it means that the next year it might also be prepaid, but Mr. Speaker, it doesn't make any difference, really. It means that the money is properly accounted for, the payments go to where they're needed, and this gives us the strong university sector that we enjoy in the province, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park on her first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, in their first budget back in 2009, the NDP pulled the same sleight of hand that the former government had tried to pull. That was with prepaying universities in one year and not the next, in manipulating what the budget would actually show. When the previous government front-loaded their budget prior to the 2009 election, the NDP cried foul, and in fact the Premier called it a fudget budget. If this is the legacy, which is now the NDP's record, shifting around payments, hiking fees, failing to disclose significant financial information, and this finance minister has given Nova Scotians no reason to trust her today. Mr. Speaker, will the minister tell Nova Scotians if there has been any prepayment to universities in this fiscal year that will alter the true budget that we'll be seeing next week?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, all of the details of the budget will be available for the honourable member and the public on Budget Day.
The Honourable Member for the Honourable Leader of the Official the Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Somebody.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Madam Speaker, Mr. Speaker, thank you. Mr. Speaker, yesterday in public accounts and again in this House, we learned that the Treasury Board decided to ignore a known error of $27 million in the budget that was presented to all Nova Scotians. That makes the decision to ignore that error a political one and not an accounting one, Mr. Speaker. When the Treasury Board decided to ignore that known error and allow an error-prone budget to be presented, they took the integrity of this government into their own hands. Either that, Mr. Speaker, or they went right to the top. My question to the Premier is, when did the Premier know, on what date did he know that his budget was wrong?
Good question.
Yeah.
The budget was never wrong and there was never an error made. The information went directly to the Auditor General. He was fully aware of it. He wrote a letter stating that the revenue projections were correct, Mr. Speaker. So that is the case. As to his complaint around the 27 million, I would have known that when he issued the further report that came out, a couple of weeks ago in February, because Mr. Speaker, as the Auditor General pointed out, it was not material. It was, in fact, Mr. Speaker, the normal practice for governments right up until he complained about this particular instance, the same practice that the Conservative government would have used for years, Mr. Speaker. In fact, what he did was make a recommendation with respect to greater transparency, one that, had the previous government changed, this would never have been an issue, but they didn't. So, Mr. Speaker, we're going to adopt the recommendation because it's the appropriate thing to do. And, Mr. Speaker, I believe that this will create a level of transparency and integrity in our books that is appropriate.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the Auditor General was very clear that this is a significant error. It is a $27 million error. $27 million is a lot of money to every Nova Scotian, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday at Public Accounts, the Auditor General said that the issue of materiality is irrelevant to whether you fix an error or not. If the budget is wrong and you know it, you fix it. That is a principle that all Nova Scotians will understand. But the Treasury Board, knowing that the budget was wrong, chose not to fix it. And when they made that decision, they took the integrity of this Premier's government into their own hands. So I will ask the Premier whether any of his staff were present at that Treasury Board decision. And I hope he answers it, Mr. Speaker, because we are going to do a Freedom of Information request and find out if they were there or not. But he can save the paperwork and clear this up right now and tell us whether his office was present when that awful decision was made.
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, we'll deal with the Freedom of Information request when it comes, but I can tell him this. What came to Treasury Board, and I went back and checked on this, was not a decision. In fact, they weren't asked for a decision at all because there was no decision to be made. That was made by the Department of Finance. The only thing that came to the Treasury Board is the revenue information, not for decision.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, no one elected the Department of Finance. They elected that Premier and that government to tell them the truth when they present budgets to the people of Nova Scotia. So the Premier might want to talk to his own Deputy Minister of Finance, who in public accounts yesterday said that the department sent the information to Treasury Board, and when she was asked who made the decision, she didn't say they did, she said Treasury Board made the decision, Mr. Speaker. That is a matter of record in public accounts. So I will ask the Premier, if he is so callous about the integrity of his own government, why does he sit idly by while it is under such serious question?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the question that that the leader asked is simply factually incorrect. It says things that people said in other things that are untrue, Mr. Speaker. The budget is prepared by the Department of Finance. It is prepared by the Department of Finance. It's based on the budget revenue estimates. And remember, they're forecasts that are done on March 1st, and everything else that comes after that, at that time, as was the practice with 10 years of Conservative government, is included in the first forecast update. And that, Mr. Speaker, is the appropriate thing to do, and that is exactly what was done.
The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister for Community Services please tell members of this House how many families are waiting for affordable housing in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What I can tell the member opposite with respect to wait lists, the fact is that the wait lists themselves have different meaning, because we have people on the wait list that may want to move to specific affordable housing, and they have to wait for that particular house or apartment to become available because it's something that they want. But I also can say that we are the first government in the history of Nova Scotia that is going to do something about it, because we are going forward with the first in Nova Scotia housing strategy.
The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove on her first supplementary.
To answer my question, Mr. Speaker, according to eligibility stats provided by the Department of Community Services, there are 1,777 families waiting for housing, and that's 591 in HRM alone. Can the Minister please tell members of this House how many seniors are waiting for housing in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, what I would like to say about housing in the province is it takes time in order to build the infrastructure throughout the province of Nova Scotia. And it's too bad when the Liberals were in 10 years ago, they didn't plant the seeds to go towards that, to be able to build housing. The same with the progressive Conservatives. We wouldn't be having this type of issue in the province if they would have done some planning. And we are doing something. We have come forward with announcing, will we be doing a housing strategy that is going to help seniors, that's going to be able to help those who are most vulnerable. And so at least, you know what, we do something. We do not just say words without action. Our words always come with action.
The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove on her final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For the Minister's information, there are 2,518 seniors across the province waiting for affordable housing. Mr. Speaker, the department has information outlining need for affordable housing, yet this government has waited for the final hours of a majority mandate to even begin consultation. It would seem this is not the same NDP that touted social justice when they were in opposition. My question, why is it taking so long? Could it be that this NDP cares more about polling numbers than the numbers of families and seniors in need of housing?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We have worked from day one becoming government for seniors, for the most vulnerable in this province. We have invested over $420 million throughout all our departments. We have been strategizing. We have been consulting. It is not a last minute. They may make decisions on the last minute for political reasons. We have worked very hard. I traveled last fall throughout this whole province. We received well over 500 pieces of correspondence and emails. We have the stakeholders in this province supporting what we're doing. They have been involved with this process from day one. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier says he didn't know about the $27 million error in the budget. That leaves that awful decision squarely on the shoulders of the President of the Treasury Board, where the Deputy Minister of Finance said at Public Accounts yesterday the decision was actually made. The decision to present a budget with known errors to the people of Nova Scotia apparently was made at Treasury Board, chaired by the President of the Treasury Board, the Deputy Premier. So my question to the Deputy Premier, Mr. Speaker, is who in the Premier's office got minutes of, was told about, was informed about the decision to go forward with a budget that they knew was wrong before it went to the printers?
The Honourable the Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll tell the Leader of the Third Party once again that it was presented to Treasury Board as an item of information.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on his first supplementary.
Good to know, Mr. Speaker, because if it was presented as an item of information that there was a $27 million mistake and then the Treasury Board had to deal with it, we're finally getting somewhere. Now, Mr. Speaker, either the chair of the Treasury Board took the integrity of the entire government in his own hands when they made the decision to go ahead anyway and not tell anyone, or he didn't. And so I will ask the chair of the Treasury Board, the Deputy Premier, did he tell the Premier that he had just approved a budget with a $27 million mistake in it?
The Honourable the Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the only mistake here is in the line of questioning from that member, Mr. Speaker. We told him again how this was presented to us, and we acted accordingly to what the Auditor General wanted us and told us to do. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, no one is going to accept that the Auditor General told them or wanted them to leave the mistake uncorrected and not tell anybody about it when they presented it on Budget Day. That goes against every principle of transparency and fair reporting, and quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, it goes against every principle of good governance, where if you make a mistake, you tell people. If you have time to fix it, you fix it. You don't say $27 million is not very much money in a province where $27 million to every single person who relies on a truthful government is a lot of money, Mr. Speaker. So I will ask the Deputy Premier, the chair of the Treasury Board, why did he allow an error-prone budget to go before the people of Nova Scotia uncorrected?
The Honourable the Deputy Premier.
Again, Mr. Speaker, and thank you. The only errors, again, are in the line of questioning. Mr. Speaker, we reported it in the first financial update. I don't know what more I can say to that member to get it through to him. That's what we did, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier this year, paramedics sent an alarm bell to the Minister of Health and all Nova Scotians about the exodus of advanced care paramedics to other jurisdictions. In response, the minister stated, and I quote, "There's paramedics that leave every year in the province, and there's new ones that are hired. It's just like any other profession." Well, Mr. Speaker, in talking to paramedics in my community, they're telling us that it's moving from a trickle to a stream. And in fact, they found the minister's statement uncaring in such an important part of the emergency health services here in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, could the minister please tell all the members of the House how an ambulance service will be able to retain its world-class stature if we are losing our most advanced and experienced paramedics to other jurisdictions?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the question. Anytime I have an opportunity to talk about our highly trained paramedics in this province, I stand by what I said earlier, Mr. Speaker. There are paramedics on a yearly basis that choose to leave the profession here in Nova Scotia. It's very challenging when we see organizations from other jurisdictions like Alberta coming to our province, recruiting our highly trained medics, Mr. Speaker. It's something I've seen through my career as a paramedic. It's something I've seen through my career as a political MLA, Mr. Speaker. We're working extremely hard to create an environment here in Nova Scotia that appreciates paramedics, that gives opportunities for them to stay in the province, especially those medics who have been on the ambulance for a number of years, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud of the work that this government has done to improve the environment, the working environment that our paramedics work in here in Nova Scotia.
The honourable member for Kings West on his first supplementary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm hearing quite a different story from our paramedics from across the province. Many of them expressed their frustration around a lack of recognition for the ever-increasing role we have asked them to play in our healthcare system. Respect in what they are asked to do on a daily basis and the challenges associated with policies they are asked to work within. Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Health, given that the Minister has likely heard some of the concerns expressed as well, could he please indicate whether he has spoke to EMC about these issues, and if so, when?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I said, I was very proud to be part of a government that has increased the awareness of paramedics. I want to congratulate the former minister who had the foresight to see, as we move forward with Better Care Sooner, that a key component of that are our paramedics. They're working in a number of environments that they never worked in before, Mr. Speaker. It's because we recognize the importance of their skills, their training, and their dedication. I know that there are some medics who have chose to leave the province. I don't hold that against any paramedic who makes that decision. It's a very difficult decision to decide maybe to work out west, Mr. Speaker. I know you recognize those decisions that Cape Bretoners have made to choose to go somewhere else to find employment. But I can guarantee, and I want to reassure paramedics, that we highly respect the work they do here in Nova Scotia, that I'm going to continue to work as Minister of Health and on behalf of the government to ensure that they have every opportunity to prosper here in the province, to grow their profession, and to show the respect that they deserve, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Kings West on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And who the minister really needs to give more assurance to are the people of Nova Scotia, because I can assure you there are more ambulances leaving for trauma situations with no advanced care paramedic on board. Mr. Speaker, the strength of our world-class emergency health system lies squarely with our paramedics. We have an emergency health service that Nova Scotians are very proud of. We should be. However, when you are losing your most experienced paramedics, those who can mentor others, when you are losing those who can deliver your clot-busting drugs and those who can work in nursing homes, not to mention those who arrive at the scene of serious accidents for the purpose of immediate treatment and care, you are risking a great deal. My final question to the Minister, how is the Minister going to be able to sustain all of the wonderful things they've mentioned in the throne speech pertaining to emergency services when we are losing some of our most experienced advanced care paramedics?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to reassure not only paramedics but Nova Scotians the importance of ensuring that we have the right number of paramedics across this province. We work every day to ensure that if a paramedic leaves, especially advanced care paramedic, that those positions are filled with advanced care paramedics. By the end of last year, Mr. Speaker, we had over 295 advanced care paramedics in our system. The year before, in 2010, we had 294. So we're roughly keeping the same number of advanced care paramedics in the province. We know the importance of trying to encourage those primary care paramedics, those intermediate care paramedics who are in our system to upgrade their skills so that they can take full advantage of providing the services like clot-busting drugs, Mr. Speaker, a first in North America, if not a first worldwide, here in our province. So we're very proud. I'm very proud of the work we're doing. We're going to continue to work with paramedics to try to address the concerns that some have, and I'm very proud to move forward and work with them and really show the recognition that paramedics deserve, Mr. Speaker, here in our province.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, Mr. Speaker, the Deputy Premier was asked to confirm what the Deputy Minister of Finance said in testimony before the Standing Committee on Public Accounts. She said it was, quote, political masters, the Treasury Board, who decided not to reveal the $27 million budget error. The Deputy Premier, who is also the chair of the Treasury Board, said no. With his answer, a single word, the Deputy Premier undermined the testimony of a long-time respected public servant and Deputy Minister. Will the Deputy Premier retract his statement and confirm it was, in fact, his decision to hide the $27 million error?
Honourable the Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker, again, it's the same question regurgitated by another member from the same party. Mr. Speaker, I answered it before. It was given to us as information. If they can't understand that, Mr. Speaker, I don't know what else to tell them.
The honourable member for Cape Breton West on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. All we're looking for is the truth. The Deputy Premier cannot have it both ways. Either the Deputy Minister is right when she said that the decision to cover up the $27 million budget error was made by the Treasury Board, or she isn't. Nova Scotians deserve straight answers. It's time for him to come clean. Will the Deputy Premier clear up this contradiction between his version of events and that of the Deputy Minister of Finance?
The Honourable the Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the only thing that has to be cleaned up here is his quotes. Mr. Speaker, that's the reality here, is the quotes that he's making may be inaccurate, Mr. Speaker. So I'd ask him to go and look at Hansard and put forward the proper quotes. Mr. Speaker, we stand by our statements and we support our senior civil servants too, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable member for Cape Breton West on his final supplementary.
You know, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to this sad affair, all the roads lead to the door of the Deputy Premier's office. The government says that this is all part of their normal budget process. So, Mr. Speaker, if error-prone budgets are normal under the NDP, how can we trust the budget that they're going to deliver to this House next week?
The Honourable Deputy Premier.
I guess that falls under, thank you, Mr. Speaker, I guess that falls under what you can't do with fact, you try to do with bluster, and he's not very good at either one, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The Honourable member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, since 2008, Strait Area Transit has been providing an essential, accessible transportation for residents of the Strait Area, specifically Richmond County, Inverness County, and the town of Port Hawkesbury. Mr. Speaker, whether it be for medical appointments, to attend the Strait Area campus, the community college, or to attend other activities, many residents came to rely on this essential service. Unfortunately, on Monday of this week at 4 p.m., the Board of Strait Area Transit announced that it was going to cease operations effective immediately due to financial problems. My question, Mr. Speaker, is to the Premier. Could the Premier advise what actions his government is prepared to take in order to assist in restoring Strait Area Transit?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know the decision that he's referring to, but if you'd like to send it over to me, I'd be happy to receive it. In fact, when I was last in the Strait, I met with folks from the Strait Area Transit. My understanding is that we assisted them with the issues that they had, the requests that they had. But if there is additional information, I'd be happy to receive it and to have a look at it. In fact, you know, this government sees the question of rural transportation as a very important one. It's becoming increasingly important because of the aging population. Seniors have to be able to get to medical appointments. They have to be able to get to grocery stores. They have to be able to get to pick up prescriptions, and we know this is a growing issue, and in fact, we're in a very proactive fashion trying to address it. Now, can we do everything at once? No, obviously not, but we are mapping out a plan for community transportation which will benefit the people of the province, and in the initial instance, we're working with community-based options.
The honourable member for Richmond on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the Premier may have missed it, but I had introduced a resolution earlier talking about straight area transit and its closure and calling upon all members of the House to work together to find a solution. I was very pleased that that received unanimous support of the House because, Mr. Speaker, I did have the opportunity in the fall, as the Premier did indicate, when the straight area transit was faced with financial problems, was to talk to the Deputy Minister of Service Nova Scotia and to the Minister to seek financial assistance, which we're very pleased that they did. Unfortunately, the transit, even with that, has found itself to the point that they were no longer able to operate past Monday of this week, and therefore the operations have ceased. I'm wondering, Mr. Speaker, maybe if the Minister of Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations could advise us as to what actions his department is prepared to take in working with all partners involved to restore this service immediately.
The Honourable Minister of Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question, and I also thank him for the answer. It's our desire to meet with the stakeholders there. The department had given straight area transit, I think the member's aware, about $120,000 last fall, another $5,000 I think 2 weeks ago, I think before we get too far down that road, we want to have a discussion with stakeholders in the area, in particular the municipal units, and to see what is possible to try to ensure the long-term sustainability of that service for the people in the Strait area.
The Honourable Member for Richmond on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would certainly hope that the Minister would be prepared to have that meeting as soon as possible, because I can tell you my office has been flooded with calls, parents of children who are attending the Rock Centre in Port Hawkesbury, for example, on a daily basis, hearing from students who go to the community college, hearing from people who have regularly scheduled medical appointments, whether it be physio, whether it be dialysis, and they really have no option now as to how they are going to get to and from now that straight transit has ceased its operations. In the throne speech, I was pleased to see that the government did acknowledge the importance of community-based transportation. So I guess my question to the minister is he prepared to commit to meeting with all stakeholders next week so that we can restore the service as soon as possible?
The Honourable Minister of Service Nova Scotia, Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't know what the possibilities around that are. I'm just thinking about the Easter weekend, and we're on thinking about tomorrow and Monday. But I will direct my staff, and I think they've probably been having some discussions already, but I will direct my staff as much as that may be possible to try to see that they could do that. I'd like to participate in that meeting, and I'm not sure if I can, but I'll certainly see that the people in my department try to arrange that as soon as possible.
Good, Minister.
The Honourable Member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question through you will be to the Minister of Education. Yesterday, after 2 attempts, the minister was unable or unwilling to answer a very simple question: how many school boards will see budget cuts this year? So I trust, Mr. Speaker, that the minister has been briefed on that by now or has read some media coverage. So my question will be, how many school boards will see budget cuts this year?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We have 8 school boards in the province of Nova Scotia, and 3 of those school boards will be receiving more funding based on the population that they have within their schools, and 5 school boards will be receiving funding appropriate to the number of students that they have in their system. We were able to make sure that we have guaranteed that our permanent teachers will be able to retain jobs by capping the reductions based on the declining enrollment to most of the school boards to 1.5. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Colchester North on her first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It would have been great to have that information yesterday. However, the minister now does know it. Cape Breton Victoria, Chignecto Central, South Shore Regional, Strait Regional, and Tri-County will all see direct funding cuts, courtesy of this minister. So my question to the minister is this. With increasing operating costs and increasing program delivery costs, how are these 5 boards who are receiving less money expected to pay the bills without affecting students in our classroom?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We are investing in our students across the province. We have increased the funding per student by 3% this year. We have a problem in our province that we are dealing with that is a nationwide problem with declining enrollment, and we are doing that by investing properly and appropriately in our children in this province. Thank you.
Hear, hear. The Honourable Member for Colchester North on her final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure how comforting those words will be to the parents and students in Tri-County or in South Shore. Both of those boards, Mr. Speaker, courtesy of this minister, have had funding cuts for the last 3 consecutive years. And at the same time, Mr. Speaker, courtesy of her NDP government, power rates have been allowed to increase by 30%. In 2012, for example, Mr. Speaker, the power bill for Tri-County was over $1 million. The power bill for South Shore was over $1 million. And both of those are increases, yet funding to those boards have been cut. So my question to the minister, as power rates are increasing, as funding to these boards are decreasing, what programs and services is this minister suggesting should be eliminated so the board can pay their bills?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I trust that the boards will make the appropriate decisions, and no programs from our public school programs will be cut from any of our boards. Our boards are there to make the appropriate decisions, and we are funding them to do that, and if they are having any trouble at all with their budgets, we will send people down to support them. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Education. Education is the key to a confident, bright future for our young Nova Scotians. Rural schools are the heart of our community, supporting the development of our young people. This NDP government is on a destructive path, destroying communities and tearing our hearts out. My question is, Minister, will you step in to ensure that the South Shore Regional School Board doesn't cripple the communities of the schools on the chopping block?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I would like to thank the member opposite for the question. This government is very much invested in our communities and our school communities, and his question is, I find a little perplexing, is that we are supporting all of our schools in the province, and if they're having any significant difficulties with any of the budget considerations, we are most definitely there to support them. I want to say again very clearly, we do support our community schools and our communities and the children that go to those schools. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton North on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, there's been a 1.5% budget cut to the South Shore Regional School Board this year alone, which equals $1.8 million, and I have a document here to support that. The local economy has lost 5,600 full-time jobs since February 2009, and I have another document here to support that. In the Chronicle Herald, there was an article that quoted Chairwoman Jennifer Nogler as saying, "I'm very concerned we're driving those communities we thought we were bringing together." The communities want to make this work. My question is, will the NDP commit to stop working against Nova Scotians to start working with them to create a prosperous, bright future?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We are working with communities, and we're definitely working with the school board, and our school boards have put their name forward and have been elected to make sure that every student that they have in their district receives the appropriate, equitable, making sure that they are getting everything they need with our public school programs, and they're working hard to do that. And I have met with all of the boards in the province of Nova Scotia over the last couple of weeks, and they know that we are there to work together. Thank you.
The honourable member for Cape Breton North on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the South Shore Regional School Board is very efficient. They have weathered years of cuts under the current government with no support for positive growth. Rural schools truly are the hearts of our communities. Last May, a group called a Small Schools Delegation met and presented a brief called Schools at the Centre. The group asked to delay reviews in order to address some of their concerns, and we know there was no dice. The response they received, thanks for your unsolicited brief. Will the NDP continue to opt for their preferred recommendations, or will they step up and realize the people are right and their plan is ripping the heart out of communities across this province?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as I said, we are there to work with our school boards to make sure that every student in our province gets the schooling that they need, the proper education. We are investing in our communities, and if any board is having any significant problems, we are there to work together, work with the community to make sure that every child has the opportunity to succeed.
The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there are many disturbing cases of animal abuse in our province. Unfortunately, we've seen little in the way of animal protection during this mandate of the NDP government until recently. My question to the Minister of Agriculture: what tangible and effective changes can the people of Nova Scotia expect from this government in this session?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, that's a good question. It's our plan during this session to introduce legislation that I think will tend to mirror legislation across the country in other provinces to increase penalties in particular. I think clarify some language in the present act, and I want the member to be aware that this would be the second time in our mandate that we made adjustments to that act. So I asked them to hold on. It'll probably be, I think, a week or two before that legislation gets introduced.
The honourable member for Kings West on his first supplementary.
I thank the minister for that straightforward answer. Mr. Speaker, however, it is a shame the NDP government has not acted upon animal cruelty matters until now. Cases of abuse, puppy mills, and terrible breeding and living conditions for animals across the province have occurred while government sat idly by. And Mr. Speaker, many of the changes government can make to address these issues can be made in regulations, not in legislation. Therefore, the NDP did not have to wait for the legislative session to make changes. My question to the minister: why has the minister waited to make changes in legislation when the changes could have been made in regulations by the Executive Council at any time?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Yeah, I'd like the member opposite to think for a second around the issue on the broader scope. It's an animal health issue. We rely in particular on the veterinarians who work for us to advise us on legislation or regulations around animal health. We think that it's important to listen to the people who are professionally trained in this area, and to this point, in my time as minister, which is coming on for 4 years, there's nothing that they brought to us that would indicate that there's anything that regulation would have to be tweaked. But we are doing a review of that legislation. We have some ideas of changes that we think would be significant and would mirror legislation across the country. But I want to make it clear that we really depend on information from professional veterinarians on how to go about legislation or regulation in terms of proper care for animals.
The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, 2 days ago, we learned that the government plans to create a new department, the Department of Education and Early Childhood Development. Mr. Speaker, on a number of occasions, we've asked the minister... We've asked the Minister of Community Services. Mr. Speaker, on a number of occasions, we've asked the Minister of Community Services, who used to be responsible for childcare, to clarify statements she made with regard to funding for childcare centres. And at best, Mr. Speaker, she's been inconsistent. So my question will be for the Minister of Education. Will the Minister tell members of this House what plans her government has for the funding model for childcare centres in Nova Scotia?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very pleased to stand here today representing the early years component of the work that this government does. It is very important that every child in this province has the potential, has the opportunity to reach their potential. So this government is making sure that we're looking at education and child development from zero, from birth, right straight through to their years of schooling. So I'm very proud to be able to say that we will be talking about these initiatives in the coming weeks, and I'm very proud that at this time that I'm representing